There's an old family photograph from the early 1970s showing Tina Turner and Ike Turner surrounded by 4 young boys. Everyone is smiling toward the camera, giving the impression of an ordinary, happy family portrait. But history would eventually give that photograph a heartbreaking meaning. Because within the following decades, every one of those 4 boys would face struggles that few people outside the family could have imagined. And tragically, Tina Turner would eventually experience the unimaginable pain of losing 3 of her sons during her own lifetime. Long before the world knew her as Tina Turner, she was Anna Mae Bullock, a young woman from rural Tennessee whose life changed after she became connected with bandleader Ike Turner and his Kings of Rhythm. She was only 18 years old when she became a mother for the first time. In August 1958, Anna Mae gave birth to a son named Raymond Craig. His father was saxophonist Raymond Hill, a musician associated with Ike Turner's band. Hill had returned to Mississippi around the time his son was born, and his relationship with Anna Mae did not continue for very long. Craig would therefore grow up with his biological father largely absent from his everyday life. Raymond Hill continued living separately from his son for most of his life and died in 1996 from congestive heart failure. Meanwhile, Anna Mae's own career was beginning to change rapidly. She became increasingly important within Ike Turner's musical operation, eventually emerging as its featured singer, while also becoming romantically involved with Ike. Then, in October 1960, she gave birth to another son, Ronnie Turner. Ronnie was different from his brothers in one important respect. He was the only child Tina and Ike Turner had together biologically. But Ike already had 2 sons from an earlier relationship with Lorraine Taylor. Those boys were Ike Turner Jr. and Michael. The 2 children had initially spent much of their time with their mother, but Ike remained part of their lives. When Ike and Tina married in Tijuana, Mexico, in 1962, their complicated family situation changed dramatically. Ike adopted Craig, while Tina adopted Ike's 2 sons. Suddenly, 4 boys who had entered the family through different circumstances were being raised together under the same roof. At the same time, Ike and Tina Turner's musical career was beginning to explode. Throughout the 1960s, their name became increasingly recognizable, and the boys grew up surrounded by musicians, recording sessions, and constant travel. The 4 brothers were close enough in age that they could grow up almost as a single group. Although they did not share the same biological parents, they shared the same household, the same famous family name, and, for many years, the same understanding of who their parents were. From the outside, it could easily have looked like a remarkable family success story. They experienced things most children could only imagine. They traveled around with musicians, encountered famous performers, and witnessed the entertainment business from behind the scenes. But beneath the glamour of the stage, another reality was developing, and that reality would influence the family for decades. The marriage between Ike and Tina Turner became increasingly troubled. As their professional success grew, so did the turmoil within their private lives. Tina later spoke openly about the abuse she experienced during the marriage, explaining that what began as verbal cruelty eventually became physical. Her accounts described a relationship in which fear and violence became part of everyday life. Despite that, audiences continued seeing the couple perform together. On stage, they could appear confident, glamorous, and successful. Behind closed doors, however, their private reality was dramatically different. Tina later described those years as an extremely dark period of her life. The contrast was striking. Millions of people admired the performers they saw on stage, while the woman behind that image was struggling to survive an intensely difficult marriage. And the 4 boys were growing up inside that environment. The children were not completely protected from the conflict. Tina later acknowledged that the boys knew about the fighting in the household. The arguments were frequent enough that they could not simply be hidden from children living under the same roof. As Ike's own problems with substance abuse became more serious, the atmosphere became even more unpredictable. For 4 young boys, home was therefore a complicated place. It was simultaneously a world filled with music and opportunity and a household marked by tension. Craig, in particular, appeared to carry much of the emotional impact quietly. Years later, Tina recalled that Craig had often seemed unusually sad during his childhood. She remembered him frequently looking downward rather than meeting people's eyes. To Tina, it appeared that the turmoil around him had affected him deeply. That quiet personality would remain part of Craig's character long into adulthood. By 1976, Tina had reached a breaking point. After another serious confrontation with Ike while they were traveling in Dallas, she decided she could no longer remain in the relationship. She left with very little and sought safety at a nearby hotel. The decision was enormously difficult. Tina later described the fear and uncertainty surrounding that moment, including the fact that she had very little money and no clear idea of what would happen next. But she had made her choice. She was leaving. That decision became the beginning of one of the greatest reinventions in music history. The divorce was finalized in 1978. Tina walked away from much of the shared wealth and property, choosing instead to retain her stage name and, most importantly, her freedom. She was now faced with rebuilding almost everything. Her marriage was over. Her professional partnership with Ike was finished. And the 4 boys who had grown up inside that household were entering adulthood while trying to understand what the separation meant for their own lives. Each brother would eventually take a very different path. For Craig, the emotional effects of his childhood would remain especially significant. His story would eventually become one of the most heartbreaking chapters in the family's history. Craig Turner spent much of his adult life avoiding the spotlight. Unlike his famous mother, he had little interest in becoming a celebrity. After finishing high school, he joined the United States Navy, choosing a structured environment that was very different from the unpredictable world in which he had grown up. Military life gave Craig discipline, routine, and distance from the entertainment industry. After completing his service, he established himself professionally in real estate. He built a relatively ordinary life far away from the recording studios and touring schedules that had dominated his childhood. Craig lived quietly in California and generally avoided the kind of media attention that followed his mother and some of his brothers. For decades, he remained largely outside the public conversation. Then, in 2018, the family's history took another devastating turn. Craig died at the age of 59. His death was deeply shocking to those who knew him, particularly because he had maintained such a private existence and had rarely discussed his personal struggles publicly. Tina was devastated. For a mother who had once described the births of her children as some of the happiest experiences of her life, losing Craig was an extraordinary emotional blow. In later interviews, Tina spoke about how difficult it was for her to understand what had happened. She had believed that her son was moving toward happiness and a new chapter in his life. She later reflected that loneliness may have played an important role in the final period of Craig's life. Tina continued remembering him long after his death. She kept photographs of him around her home and spoke about him with the tenderness of a mother who still thought of her son as her child, regardless of his age. His death became the first time Tina experienced the loss of one of her own children. Sadly, it would not be the last. Only 4 years later, another devastating loss would strike the family. This time, it would be her only biological son with Ike Turner. Ronnie Turner was born in October 1960 and occupied a unique place in the family. He was the only child born biologically to both Tina and Ike Turner. Growing up surrounded by music, Ronnie eventually followed a path that brought him into the entertainment world. He played bass guitar and performed with the group Manufactured Funk. He also had opportunities to perform alongside musicians connected to his parents. Unlike Craig, who chose a career far removed from entertainment, Ronnie seemed naturally drawn toward the same creative world that had shaped his childhood. Ronnie also appeared in a project connected to his family story. He was involved with the music video associated with the 1993 film about Tina and Ike's turbulent relationship. The project brought renewed attention to the family's past. For Ronnie, participating in something connected so directly to his parents created an unusual connection between his own life and the story that had defined his childhood. In 2007, Ronnie married French singer Ida Turner. Their relationship became an important source of stability, and Ida remained close to Tina. She was frequently seen with Tina at performances and family occasions, and over time the two women developed a relationship that went beyond a conventional mother-in-law connection. But Ronnie's life was not without difficulties. Tina had spoken about some of the challenges her son experienced during his younger years, including substance-related problems and legal difficulties. Those struggles occurred against the background of the family's turbulent history. Ida later recalled Tina, expressing concern that Ronnie might repeat some of the destructive patterns associated with his father's life. It was a fear rooted in Tina's own painful experience. She wanted her son to create a different future. Despite his difficulties, Ronnie eventually found stability through his marriage and continued involvement in music. He and Ida also reportedly had children of their own, extending the Turner family into another generation. But in December 2022, another tragedy arrived. Ronnie died at the age of 62 following complications associated with metastatic colon cancer. His illness had reportedly been diagnosed relatively recently, leaving the family with little time to prepare for what was coming. Tina announced the news publicly, describing Ronnie as her beloved son and expressing the pain of losing another child. Ronnie's death was especially painful because it came only 4 years after Craig's passing. Tina had now lost 2 of her children. 2 sons remained, Ike Jr. and Michael, both of whom had originally been Ike's children before Tina adopted them. The family story was becoming increasingly complicated by grief and distance. Ida remained close to Tina during this period. Her continued connection with the family later became significant when Tina herself passed away. The losses were no longer isolated tragedies. They were becoming part of a pattern that would define the family's final years. Of Tina Turner's 4 sons, Ike Turner Jr. maintained perhaps the strongest direct connection to the family's musical heritage. Born in 1958 to Ike Turner and Lorraine Taylor, he was adopted by Tina after her marriage to Ike. From an early age, music surrounded him. He reportedly began playing instruments as a teenager and showed curiosity about many different sounds. He first became interested in drums before later moving toward keyboards. Growing up in a family where music was both a career and a way of life, Ike Jr. naturally developed technical and musical abilities. As an adult, he became a sound engineer and musician. He eventually became involved with Bollock Sound Studios, the recording facility founded by his father. The studio had been an important part of the family's musical world and had hosted numerous recording projects over the years. Ike Jr.'s work eventually received significant professional recognition. In 2007, he was associated with a Grammy-winning traditional blues project connected to his father's music. That achievement demonstrated that he had established his own identity within the industry rather than simply being known as the son of Ike and Tina Turner. He continued creating music and later formed a duo called the Love Tang. But while his professional life contained meaningful achievements, his personal relationship with Tina became increasingly distant. In an interview during the 1980s, Ike Jr. expressed frustration that he could not reach Tina despite repeated attempts. Yet even while describing that distance, he made clear that he still loved her and regarded her as the mother who had raised him. The situation was deeply painful. Years later, Ike Jr. said that he and Tina had not been in contact for many years. The distance was particularly difficult to understand because he had spent his childhood inside her household. Their relationship had become one of the most complicated emotional threads in the family. Ike Jr. also faced personal struggles of his own, including addiction-related difficulties. In 2023, he was arrested in Texas in connection with drug possession and evidence-related charges. The arrest occurred only weeks before Tina's death. It was another difficult chapter for a man whose life had already been marked by family conflict, professional achievement, and complicated relationships. Then, in October 2025, another loss struck the Turner family. Ike Turner Jr. died in a Los Angeles hospital on October 4, 2025, just 1 day after his 67th birthday. According to family statements, he had suffered serious health problems, including heart-related issues and a stroke, followed by kidney failure. His death was especially meaningful to relatives who had grown up alongside him. Family members remembered him not merely as Ike Turner's son, but as someone they considered a brother in every meaningful sense. He had built a career as a musician and sound engineer and had earned professional recognition for his work. But his passing carried another painful realization. Tina Turner had already died more than 2 years earlier. By the time Ike Jr. passed away, 3 of Tina's 4 sons had already died. The family had endured an extraordinary concentration of loss. Ida Turner publicly remembered Ike Jr. and expressed gratitude that she had been able to speak with him shortly before his death. His passing left only one of Tina Turner's 4 sons still living. That son was Michael. Michael Turner has remained the least publicly known of Tina Turner's 4 sons. Unlike some of his brothers, he rarely appeared in interviews or sought public attention. Born in 1959 to Ike Turner and Lorraine Taylor, Michael was adopted by Tina after she married his father. He grew up inside the same famous household as his brothers. But as an adult, Michael became extremely private. Very little information about his personal life has been publicly shared, partly because he has chosen not to live in the spotlight. According to comments made by Ike Jr. years ago, the divorce between Ike and Tina affected Michael particularly strongly. He reportedly struggled emotionally with the permanent separation of his parents and wanted them to reconcile. At one point, his emotional condition became serious enough to require hospitalization. That period appears to have been an important turning point in Michael's life. In later years, he reportedly faced addiction and significant health challenges. But unlike his brothers, very little of his personal story became part of the public record. Much of what is known about Michael came through occasional comments made by Ike Jr., rather than from Michael himself. That makes his story very different from the other brothers. His life remained largely outside the public eye. By 2017, reports indicated that Michael had suffered several serious medical problems, including strokes and seizures, and that he required a wheelchair. These health difficulties added another layer of hardship to a life that had already been complicated by earlier struggles. The contrast was striking. While Tina Turner continued to be celebrated around the world for her music and achievements, one of her sons was dealing with major health problems far away from the spotlight. In 2018, Ike Jr. said that Tina continued helping financially with Michael's care. However, according to those accounts, Tina had not personally visited Michael at the care facility where he was living. The detail illustrated just how complicated the family's relationships had become. There could still be concern and financial support even when emotional and physical distance remained. That may be one of the most important themes in the entire Turner family story. Love and distance existed side by side. So did loyalty, pain, forgiveness, and years of unresolved history. Following Ike Jr.'s death in 2025, Michael became the only surviving son of Tina Turner. He was now the last living connection to the family portrait that had once shown 4 boys growing up together. For children had once shared one home. Now only one remained. And Michael, the quietest of them all, carried forward a family history that had been shaped by extraordinary fame, difficult relationships, and profound loss. While her sons were living their separate lives, Tina Turner was creating one of the greatest comeback stories in entertainment history. After leaving Ike, she rebuilt her career almost from the ground up. During the 1980s, her solo career reached extraordinary heights. Hit albums, massive tours, and a new generation of fans transformed her into one of the world's most successful performers. The woman who had once walked away from an abusive marriage with very little had become a global superstar. Her transformation was remarkable. She had not simply survived a difficult chapter. She had reinvented her entire public identity and built a career that eventually earned her the title queen of rock and roll. In 1986, Tina began a relationship with German music executive Erwin Bach. The relationship became one of the most stable and enduring parts of her later life. They married in 2013 and eventually made Switzerland their permanent home. For Tina, the relationship represented a kind of peace that had been missing from much of her earlier personal history. Her later years with Erwin were described as among the calmest and happiest periods of her life. But even as her personal life became more peaceful, her health increasingly became a concern. Tina faced several serious medical problems. In 2017, she underwent a kidney transplant, with Irwin serving as the donor. It was an extraordinary gesture and another sign of the depth of their relationship. She had also experienced other significant health problems, including a stroke and intestinal cancer. Much of the struggle was kept relatively private, while she continued to be remembered around the world for her extraordinary career. Then, on May 24, 2023, Tina Turner died at her home in Switzerland near Zurich after a long illness. She was 83 years old. By then, she had already experienced the deaths of two of her sons. Tina had spoken publicly about motherhood throughout her life. In 2021, she reflected that the births of Craig and Ronnie had been among the happiest moments she had ever experienced. Even after losing Craig, she continued carrying the emotional weight of motherhood. Her relationship with Ike Jr. and Michael was more complicated. Both were children she had raised, yet the relationships had become distant over time. Their connections to her were shaped not only by love, but also by the painful legacy of their relationship with Ike and the aftermath of the divorce. At different points, both men expressed a desire to reconnect with the woman who had raised them, but the distance between them was difficult to overcome. Their story illustrates how complicated family relationships can become, even when affection remains underneath years of separation. Tina was eventually asked whether she had forgiven Ike for the abuse she experienced during their marriage. In 2018, she said that as an older woman, she had found forgiveness in her heart. But forgiveness did not mean that she wanted to return to the relationship or work alongside him again. It was a powerful reflection from a woman whose life had been profoundly shaped by that marriage. The experience affected her career, her identity, her children, and nearly every major part of her adult life. So, what remains of the Turner family today? Looking back at the entire story, it is difficult not to notice the extraordinary concentration of loss that affected the family. Between 2018 and 2025, the family experienced a series of devastating deaths. Craig died in 2018. Ronnie died in 2022. Tina died in 2023. And Ike Jr. died in 2025. For major losses unfolded within only a few years. After Ike Jr.'s death, Michael remained the only surviving son among Tina Turner's 4 children. He was also the least publicly visible of the brothers. The family that had once appeared together in photographs from the 1970s had been reduced to a single surviving son. The concentration of these losses is difficult to comprehend. But the Turner family story cannot be reduced only to tragedy. There was also extraordinary talent, ambition, survival, and reinvention. And at the center of it all was Tina Turner. Her journey from a young woman trapped in a painful marriage to an internationally celebrated performer remains one of the most remarkable stories of personal reinvention in modern music. She rebuilt her career after leaving Ike. She created a new identity, and she continued performing at a level few artists could match. Her resilience became part of her legacy. For many people who have experienced difficult circumstances, Tina's story represents the possibility of starting again. Her achievements were not simply musical. They were deeply personal. But the complete story of Tina Turner also includes the 4 boys who grew up behind the scenes. Each brother responded to their unusual childhood differently. One sought a quiet life. Another stayed close to music. Another faced significant health and personal difficulties. And another remained largely outside the public eye. Their lives demonstrate that children growing up around fame do not necessarily experience that fame in the same way. The world saw the stage. The boys experienced the household behind it. And each carried some part of that history into adulthood. Together, their stories create a much more complicated picture than the familiar narrative of Tina Turner's incredible career. They remind us that behind every famous family name are individuals with their own memories, struggles, achievements, and relationships. Today, Tina Turner's musical legacy remains enormous. Her voice, performances, and career continue to be remembered around the world. But there is another, quieter part of her legacy. It is a story of four brothers who grew up together, lived very different lives, and ultimately became part of a family history marked by both extraordinary fame and heartbreaking loss. Their story is also a reminder that fame cannot protect a family from hardship. Success cannot erase the effects of a difficult childhood. And even the most celebrated people in history can carry private struggles that the public never fully sees. The Turner family's history continued to echo long after the music stopped. The four boys from that old family photograph each followed a different road, but their lives remained connected by the same childhood and the same extraordinary family story. And perhaps that is what makes their story so powerful. Behind the legend of Tina Turner was a mother, a family, and four sons whose lives unfolded far beyond the stage lights. Their story deserves to be remembered not only because of how famous their family became, but because of the very human experiences they carried with them. If you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories from the lives of legendary stars and their families.